A few months ago, a client with an adult disabled child approached me and requested that I build a safety gate for her new home. The requirement was that it needed to match the balusters, rails, and newel posts of the existing stairs, and this is the design I came up with. So let's dive into the build.
So sometimes items come in, maybe they have a ding, or you drop something on it and put a ding in it. This one has a ding right there, another small one here. And some of the easiest ways to take a ding out of a board, especially if it's soft like poplar or pine, is with steam, which is why I keep an iron in the shop. So a little bit of water on a rag or a paper towel. Sometimes you can steam these out. The water and steam swell the fibers. Where they've been compressed by whatever was dropped on them or where they've been dropped. Doesn't always bring it back 100%, but frequently, if it's just a ding and not a gouge, it'll bring it back close enough that you can sand it smooth. And bring a little life back to it. Of course, it's always nicer if something's shipped in and it comes in and it's not damaged at all, right? But you can't control the shipping carriers. That's looking really good. That one's practically gone. A little bit of sanding will take care of that. That one's pretty good. That one's gone. So yeah, we're in good shape. So these glued up overnight. And these are the verticals in this gate. And by using two pieces of wood and laminating them, one, I was able to achieve the 1.5 inch thickness that I wanted with a fairly stable build. Second is I was able to automatically get a half lap for building the brace components. Since all of the lumber was milled at the same time in the planer, it was all milled down to the same thickness, so I know that these half laps are going to be an exact fit. One of the things that concerned me about this build was how I was going to attach the uprights to the handrail. And I considered driving down through the handrail with some deep recesses, adding some dowels, but even at that, I'm still going into the end grain of this board and dealing with the split where the two boards are put together. So I was concerned about that, that might not be strong enough. And then it dawned on me one of the simplest solutions I have to make this happen is a simple pocket hole coming in from the sides on each side and then plugging it with a matching dowel so that it can be covered up, and once it's stained, you basically won't see it. So that's what I'm preparing to do now, is to drill these pocket holes into these vertical uprights. For that, I'm going to need my small pocket hole jig. I'm going to have to clamp that to this board tightly. So I'm just going to use a standard clamp to make that happen. Just a regular F clamp. Make sure it's seated firmly. Clamp it down tight. We don't want this to chatter as the drill cuts into the board, meaning that if it goes in, the rotation wants to pull it across the board sometimes. And that operation is complete. Using a straight piece of scrap board, I've clamped that down to give me a backstop so I can make sure that these edges are flush here. And as you can see, I've still got my half lap, so I'll lay down my base piece, drop it in the half lap. This one, drop it in the half lap. Square it up as best I can to start with. Let's see where we end up here, because what I want to do is use another piece I cut that matches the inside dimension here to go inside here so I can verify my spacing and make sure that my layout looks like it's going to be okay and that everything's going to line up. This side will have hinges on it, so for this side, all of this needs to be flush. That end I want to extend out just a little with a bull nose to help catch on the baluster when the gate closes. So there's a little extra here. I'll be cutting that off and then rounding it over as we get closer to final assembly. But this looks like it's going to work out. So the next thing I have to do is, with this laid out, I'm going to check that my balusters are going to fit and what size recesses I need to put in so I can slide the baluster in and pop it back down and make sure that that's going to work. So this gate is going to be made with these steel balusters, which have a round head and a shoulder. So I've already pre-drilled these holes and verified that the shoulder is going to seat up there. Obviously I'll have to cut these to length, but I don't have extra balusters laying around, so I've made a dowel to mock up the actual length that these are going to be cut to, and the tape is marking where the shoulder is on the baluster. So what I wanted to be sure of is that I had my hole in the handrail bored deep enough to accommodate up to the shoulder while still barely clearing down here, and then with a 1/4 inch drop that the baluster is going to stay in place. This hole is only a 1/4 inch deep, so it's only going to reveal a 1/4 inch of the shoulder once it drops into place, and that is a really good fit for me. This hole is larger because the shoulder's smaller down there and it has to accommodate this square end, and when those are put in place and the decorative caps put on the ends, you'll never see the cuts or any of that, and I will be adding a little epoxy to that hole to go around that square to hold it in place so it doesn't turn. So I'm happy with that. Like I said, I only get one shot at this because I only have one set of these balusters. And now that I know with this mock-up that everything's going to work, we're ready to proceed to the next steps. So I made a jig to hold the balusters for cutting. I can clamp it down to my bench, and that way each baluster will be the exact same length. It just runs down to the stop and cut it on the line. Now the trick is, does this fit? So up to the shoulder and seat it into the bottom, and That's going to be great. Now I just have to do that 8 more times. My balusters need to be 4 inches on center. So I've marked that out on my base rail and on my handrail. So the next step will be to finish marking this out across the base rail for the top. Extend those lines up, and then to take this and the base rail to the drill press. These can be drilled by hand. If you make marks on your drill bits, etc., and Forstner bits are really the way to go with this because you want a flat bottom. You can probably also use a brad point bit as long as you're getting a decent flat bottom when you're boring the hole. Alright, we have all our balusters cut to length. Now it's time for a final test fitting. The frame is not permanently glued yet. The screws are in it. These screws down here will be replaced with dowels. But it's temporarily held in place so that I can get a good fit on this. And I'll probably do a test fit at the customer's house. Make sure everything's going to work out before we apply finish to it. One of the reasons this is fitting so well is because I use a process called relative dimensioning, which I do mention and go over in a short video I have. Basically, it's where you take measurements or markings from the workpiece rather than trying to use a tape measure. So far so good. Yep, that's going to be alright. I'm going to epoxy these in. They're not going to go anywhere. So, we're ready for an initial sanding and taking it over to the customers to get an initial fit. Trim everything up and make sure it's all going to work out before we do hinges and finish.
This build is actually 2 separate pieces. One is the gate and the other is the post that mounts the gate to the wall at the house. Here I'm milling up some poplar to make that post, and the thickness is critical since it has to match the existing trim, so I'm checking it very carefully with a fractional caliper to make sure it's going to fit.
So using a framing square, I set a backer board here so I can hold these 2 pieces flush and set it square with the front edge of my table. That'll make it easier for me to line this up. Plus, I made a line to indicate where my glue space is so I don't get too much squeeze out. Because when these 2 go together, I don't want to have to spend a lot of time doing cleanup and then have to worry about the fact that the stain might not take in this edge when the stain's applied later. This board has a slight bow to it, so what I've done is I've set it so the bow is down in the middle against this board, so as I clamp the ends, it'll continue to clamp tighter in the middle. With this glue, I've got about 8 to 10 minutes of open work time, so plenty of time to get it clamped and get it reasonably flush on the back side. The big thing is we want it to be flush here because we're going to put a cap on this board at this end, and I don't want to have to sand that down and try to get it flush by sanding, which will never happen. I have to run it through the saw again and try to get it square. And I don't want to have to trim this down any shorter than necessary. So I'd like to keep it as close to correct on the first try as possible. I think we're good to go. We'll let that sit for a couple of hours. So I have to make mortises for the hinges in both the gate and the support posts that I'm installing. So to accomplish that safely and accurately, I built a mortising jig for my palm router. I did it out of oak because it's what I had, so why not, right? So I'm going to do a couple of test cuts, and we're going to see if the depth is good, and if I like the depth, I'll be able to attach it up to the vertical member that's going to get the hinges on it. And that is flush, so I'm happy with that. So we'll proceed to make the cuts in the vertical member. These points in a project are always terrifying because if you screw this up, you've got to start over. It's one of the reasons I didn't do a final assembly and glue up already on the gate, is if I have to make another vertical member, I can after I've done this mortising, but I shouldn't have to. Alright, I have my jig clamped up into my vertical member that's going to have the hinges installed. I've verified the right faces, facing forward, etc. Also, using F-style clamps like this is a really good thing for this particular application, because the F-style clamps can be turned in such a way that you get 3 points of contact, which makes it very stable on the tabletop. So I don't have to worry about rolling it over on this narrow piece of material. All right, I think that's good. It's a good slit fit. Let's do the second one. All right, you may have heard it dig in a little there on one of those last passes, and that's because it rolled off the shoulder, but since I was already bracing on 2 other edges, it wasn't much, and you really can't even feel it. So let's check the fit. And that looks just as good as the other side. We'll take the yep, that looks pretty good. Nice flush fit with just enough clearance out here. I was looking for just about 1/4 of an inch for the hinge to come out of there, and that looks good. And this side is the same, which is what it should be since we made the same parts on the jig. So that piece is good. Ready to move on to the next. All right, so here we are, second verse, same as the first. But this is the post that's getting mounted to the wall with this spacer here. And so we'll put the hinges in this spacer just like you would a door jamb. So after all the milling and measuring and cutting, we're finally ready for some assembly. This is the part we kind of live for, right? Where we get to see it start coming together for real. So let's proceed. First thing I'm going to do is glue this set of half laps and secure those temporarily with screws, which, as I said previously, those will be replaced after the glue dries, bored out, and have dowels replace the screws for strength in here, as well as for appearance. Looking really good. Now we get to do the pocket holes. The challenges of a small shop, you get a lot of steps in. All right, we will let that set up for a few hours, and then we'll be ready to sand, replace these screws with dowels, and start applying finish. One thing I still need to do is insert some plugs into my pocket holes. Craig sells these. I'm sure other manufacturers do too, but all they say is hardwood. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's maple or what it's going to be. It's not oak. Could be poplar, but it doesn't seem to match the poplar dowels I have. I see a lot of folks that just plug these with square ends, but they get a better seat if they've got a 60-degree cut on the end, just like this one. It comes from the factory. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these 2-inch plugs on the jig here. I've got my 60-degree cutoff in place, so we're just going to go for it. So here we are with the dowel, and make sure the end is going to go which way we want it to go there, to angle, so that it matches the angle of the head on that screw, and you can see it closes off that gap very nicely. So we'll just add a little glue, and these are poplar dowels, which is the material I used to make the gate, so I know it's going to match. That off. Do that 3 more times, and then when it dries, I'll go back with my flush cut saw, cut them off flush. So I've already pulled the screw out of this one, replace it with a dowel. Pulled the screw out of this one now, and I'm going to bore a 3/8 hole. I was going to use 1/2 inch, but I decided that was going to be too large. Plus I was going to have trouble centering it in the hole. I was going to want to wander. But I think 3/8 is going to be plenty good, and I think it's going to look fine here. So we're going to get our bore started. And I have this backed up with wood so that when I come out the other side, to reduce, if not eliminate, tear out completely. Yep, it's a good smooth hole on the bottom. You see where it perforated here. So I'm going to leave these in place. Leave that spacer there so as I drive my dowel in, I can drive till it hits the tabletop and I know I'm clear on the other side, and I'll cut it off flush later. Glue. Mallet. Check the orientation of the grain, and wherever possible try to get it to go in the same direction as the grain of the wood that I'm inserting the dowel in. While the glue's still wet there, I'll come back, flush cut saw. I'm going to cut with the grain, just on the off chance that if I get into the frame a little bit, I'll still be able to sand it out and it'll look just fine. Also, while doing that, while the glue is still wet, it drives sawdust down into any crevices around that dowel, and it fills those holes. So this is the wall mount brace that we made up, and it's going to get a cap on one end, which will then also have a wrap of cove mold inside there. So we're going to attach this now with glue in preparation for doing the cove mold. And what we're going to use is some CA glue and activator. We're going to use some quick set wood glue. I'm going to use my spacer block because we have a 1-inch reveal on each side. So I'll just go ahead and use that to place that and glue it in place. Nothing complicated about this. So I've attached a 45-degree angle piece here to my sled with just some tape and CA glue, so I can take it off when I need to remove it. That should hold it fine for the cuts I need to make for these angles. And what I'm going to do is use my cutoff sled to give me the pieces of this cove mold that I need to wrap the post. So I'll make my first cut, and I'll just keep making the cuts I need as I go. And it's going to be a lot of back and forth, you know, mark and cut, to get the pieces that I need to wrap that post. Alright, we have all of our pieces cut. Took a little bit to get that done, but we've got them done. We've got them correctly sized, so now we're just going to attach them with some CA glue and activator. Small parts like this is really a great way to do this. Let you do it quickly. And since this is on the underside, it's certainly going to be strong enough for whatever's going to happen with this piece. last piece. Now this one can be a little long because we're going to go back with our flush trim saw and cut it flush with the back. So go ahead and install that now. Alright, now that those are in place, I'll cut this flush with the flush trim saw and then a little sanding. So here are the two major components, each with a coat of stain conditioner. So what's next? Well, staining them up. Has to be applied within 2 hours of the stain conditioner going on, so we'll see how it works out. Alright, so there's the support beam with the coat of stain on it, and I think it turned out alright. So looking forward to finishing up the rest of this. So here's the frame for the gate, and now it's stained to match the mounting beam. Looks like a good match. I think we're good to go there. Next steps are multiple coats of satin polyurethane to match the customer's existing finish on their current stairs, and then install the balusters and install it at the client's house. So I had to bring the gate into the house overnight so that the finish would cure, since it was going to be too cold in the shop. I added the balusters as well as the covers for the bottom of the balusters. I also mounted it to the wall mount post, made sure that all the hinges were fit and operating correctly. This will be disassembled before mounting and then reassembled.
I wasn't able to record the installation in the home, but due to lots of careful planning and preparation, it took less than an hour. The finish turned out to be a perfect match, and the wall-mounted gate support is bolted directly to a stud in the wall, and that'll provide peace of mind and years of safety for my client's child. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you receive some value from this video, and I'll see you again real soon.